President Putin's vision in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been a topic of international concern for several years now. It began in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, and has since escalated into a complex and multifaceted conflict involving military, political, and economic dimensions. Throughout this conflict, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been a central figure, with his decisions and actions shaping the course of events. Despite criticism from the West and accusations of aggression and meddling, Putin has been hailed by some Western experts for his leadership and vision in the conflict. In this article, we will explore President Putin's role in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with a particular focus on his decision-making and the impact of his actions. We will analyze both his mistakes and his correct decisions, and examine how they have affected the course of the conflict and relations between Russia and the West. Additionally, we will discuss the Western experts' assessment of Putin's leadership, the reasons behind his positive reputation among some Western experts, and the importance of considering internal factors of the conflict when assessing Putin's actions. Overall, this article aims to provide a comprehensive analysis of President Putin's vision in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and to shed light on the complex dynamics at play in this ongoing conflict. President Putin's mistake in the conflict. President Putin's biggest mistake in the Russia-Ukraine conflict was the decision to annex Crimea in 2014. This move was widely condemned by the international community, including the United States and the European Union, who imposed sanctions on Russia as a result. The annexation of Crimea violated international law and Ukraine's territorial integrity, and it set the stage for the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The move was seen as an act of aggression by the West and provoked a strong response from Ukraine, leading to a protracted and bloody conflict that continues to this day. While Putin may have believed that the annexation of Crimea would bolster his popularity at home and secure Russian interests in the region, the move had significant negative consequences. The sanctions imposed by the West have had a severe impact on the Russian economy, and the conflict in Ukraine has strained relations between Russia and the West, leading to a new era of tensions and mistrust. Furthermore, Putin's annexation of Crimea has been seen as a violation of international norms and a threat to the stability of the international order. The move has been widely criticized by human rights organizations and political leaders around the world, and it has damaged Russia's reputation on the global stage. President Putin's decision to annex Crimea was a significant mistake that has had far-reaching consequences for both Russia and the wider international community. While Putin may have believed that the move would strengthen his position, it has instead led to sanctions, economic hardship, and ongoing conflict in Ukraine. President Putin's right decisions in the conflict. Despite making a significant mistake with the annexation of Crimea, President Putin has also made some correct decisions in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. One of his most significant moves was the decision to conduct a special military operation in Crimea to secure Russian interests in the region. This operation allowed Russia to gain control of Crimea and secure its strategic interests in the Black Sea region. Putin's decision to take military action was based on the belief that the region was of vital importance to Russia's national security and that its interests needed to be protected. Additionally, Putin's leadership in the conflict has been praised by some Western experts for his vision and ability to navigate complex geopolitical terrain. His ability to mobilize support at home and abroad, as well as his willingness to engage in dialogue with Western leaders, has helped to prevent the conflict from escalating further. Moreover, Putin's decision to provide support to separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine has allowed Russia to maintain a foothold in the region and to prevent Ukraine from falling completely under Western influence. While this decision has been criticized by the West, Putin has argued that it is necessary to protect Russian-speaking populations in the region and to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. Overall, while Putin's decision to annex Crimea was a significant mistake, his other actions in the conflict have been more nuanced. His decision to conduct a special military operation in Crimea and to provide support to separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine has allowed Russia to maintain its strategic interests in the region and prevent Ukraine from falling completely under Western influence. Additionally, Putin's leadership in the conflict has been praised by some Western experts for his vision and ability to navigate complex geopolitical terrain. Western experts' assessment of Putin's vision in the conflict. Despite President Putin's mistakes in the conflict, many Western experts have praised his vision and strategic thinking in the region. Putin has been seen as a solid and mysterious politician, and his ability to navigate complex geopolitical terrain has been praised by some. One of the key areas where Putin has been praised is in his ability to mobilize support at home and abroad for his policies in the region. Putin has been able to rally support for his actions in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, both at home and abroad, which has helped to give him the political capital needed to continue to pursue his policies in the region. Furthermore, Putin has been seen as having a clear and coherent vision for Russia's role in the region. He has articulated a vision of Russia as a great power with legitimate interests in its near abroad, and he has pursued policies that are designed to secure those interests. Some Western experts have also praised Putin's willingness to engage in dialogue with Western leaders, despite the tensions between Russia and the West. Putin has been seen as a pragmatic leader who is willing to work with Western powers when it serves Russia's interests, even if there are significant disagreements between the two sides. Overall, while Putin's actions in the Russia-Ukraine conflict have been controversial, his vision and strategic thinking in the region have been praised by some Western experts. Putin has been seen as a solid and mysterious politician who is able to navigate complex geopolitical terrain and rally support for his policies at home and abroad. His willingness to engage in dialogue with Western leaders and his clear vision for Russia's role in the region have helped to shape the ongoing conflict and the wider geopolitical landscape in the region. Putin's military operation in Crimea. In February 2014, following the ousting of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, Russian troops without insignia began to appear in Crimea. These troops, which were later identified as Russian Special Forces, took control of key strategic locations in the region, including the airports and government buildings. This operation allowed Russia to secure its interests in the region and to eventually annex Crimea. The decision to conduct a special military operation in Crimea was based on several factors. Firstly, Putin believed that the region was of vital importance to Russia's national security, as it hosts Russia's only warm-water naval base in the Black Sea. Putin also believed that the largely Russian-speaking population in the region was under threat from the new Ukrainian government, which was seen as pro-Western and anti-Russian. The operation was met with international condemnation, with many Western countries imposing sanctions on Russia in response. However, Putin argued that the annexation was necessary to protect the Russian-speaking population in the region and to prevent NATO from expanding further eastward. Putin also argued that the annexation was legitimate, as it was carried out in response to a request for assistance from the local government in Crimea. The impact of the operation has been significant, both for the conflict and for the wider geopolitical landscape in the region. The annexation of Crimea has led to ongoing tensions between Russia and the West, with many Western countries refusing to recognize the annexation as legitimate. The conflict has also led to a wider crisis in Ukraine, with ongoing fighting in eastern Ukraine between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatist rebels. Furthermore, the annexation of Crimea has changed the geopolitical landscape in the Black Sea region, with Russia now in control of a strategic location that is of vital importance to its national security. The annexation has also shifted the balance of power in the region, with Russia now seen as a more dominant player in the Black Sea and Eastern Europe. Putin's military operation in Crimea was based on the belief that Russia's national security interests in the region were under threat. While the operation was met with international condemnation, Putin argued that it was necessary to protect the Russian-speaking population in the region and to prevent NATO from expanding further eastward. The impact of the operation has been significant, both for the conflict and for the wider geopolitical landscape in the region. The annexation of Crimea has led to ongoing tensions between Russia and the West, and has changed the balance of power in the Black Sea region. Change in the West's assessment of Putin. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, particularly Putin's annexation of Crimea, has led to a significant change in the West's assessment of Putin. Prior to the conflict, Putin was often seen as a strong leader who had restored Russia's place on the world stage. However, the annexation of Crimea and Russia's involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine led many in the West to view Putin in a much more negative light. Initially, Western leaders were slow to respond to the conflict, with many hoping to find a diplomatic solution to the crisis. However, as the conflict continued and the annexation of Crimea was confirmed, many Western countries began to take a harder line against Russia. Sanctions were imposed on Russia, and Russia was suspended from the G8 group of nations. The change in the West's assessment of Putin was not just a result of his actions in Ukraine, but also due to a growing sense that Putin was becoming increasingly authoritarian at home. Putin's crackdown on political opposition and civil society, including the imprisonment of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, has led many in the West to question his commitment to democratic values. Despite this, there are still some in the West who view Putin as a strong leader who is standing up for Russian interests. They argue that the West's response to the conflict has been hypocritical, and that the annexation of Crimea was a legitimate response to a perceived threat to Russian national security. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has led to a significant change in the West's assessment of Putin. While he was once seen as a strong leader who had restored Russia's place on the world stage, the annexation of Crimea and Russia's involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine has led many in the West to view him in a much more negative light. The change in assessment is not just a result of Putin's actions in Ukraine, but also due to a growing sense that he is becoming increasingly authoritarian at home. The importance of considerations within the conflict. It is important to note that when assessing President Putin's actions in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the internal factors of the conflict must also be taken into account. Without considering the internal factors, such as the historical, cultural, and political context of the conflict, the judgments about President Putin may not be accurate. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is complex and multifaceted, with deep historical and cultural roots. The relationship between the two countries has been strained for centuries, and many in Russia view Ukraine as an integral part of their country's history and culture. Additionally, there are linguistic and religious differences between the two countries that have contributed to tensions. The internal political situation in Ukraine has also been a factor in the conflict. In 2014, the country experienced a revolution that ousted the pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych. This led to a power vacuum and a shift in Ukraine's foreign policy towards the West. Many in Russia saw this as a threat to their interests, and the annexation of Crimea was seen as a way to protect Russian national security. Furthermore, the conflict in eastern Ukraine has been fueled by the support of pro-Russian separatists. Russia has denied direct involvement in the conflict, but it has been widely reported that Russia has provided support to the separatists. When assessing President Putin's actions in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it is important to consider the internal factors of the conflict. The conflict is complex and multifaceted, with deep historical, cultural, and political roots. The internal political situation in Ukraine has also been a factor in the conflict, and the support of pro-Russian separatists has further complicated the situation. Without considering these factors, judgments about President Putin's actions may be incomplete or inaccurate. In conclusion, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a complex and multifaceted issue with deep historical, cultural, and political roots. President Putin's actions in the conflict have been both criticized and praised by Western experts. While he has made mistakes, such as the annexation of Crimea, he has also shown strategic vision and leadership in some aspects of the conflict. Western experts have changed their assessment of President Putin over time, recognizing his solid and mysterious policy, as well as his amazing vision in the conflict. However, it is important to consider the internal factors of the conflict when assessing his actions. Without considering these factors, judgments about President Putin may be incomplete or inaccurate. Moving forward, it is important for both Russia and Ukraine to work towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict. This will require a commitment to dialogue and compromise, as well as a willingness to address the underlying issues that have contributed to the conflict. Only by working together can Russia and Ukraine achieve a lasting peace and stability in the region. In conclusion, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a complex issue that requires careful consideration of all the factors involved. While President Putin's actions have been controversial, it is important to recognize his leadership and strategic vision, as well as the importance of considering the internal factors of the conflict. Ultimately, a peaceful resolution of the conflict will require a commitment to dialogue and compromise from all parties involved.